Hi, I'm Mark, and welcome to the current Outside Views report on Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Russia recently tightens its requirements for conscripting soldiers. Among other things, conscription was expanded. Starting next year, the age limit for conscription will be raised from 27 to 30 years, and the men are no longer allowed to leave the country after they have been drafted into the military. And that's another move by the Kremlin to ensure sufficient supplies for the front in the future. While many in the West are taking the mobilization efforts as yet another sign that the Kremlin is cornered by its losses in the aggressive war, one expert warns against underestimating Kremlin chief Vladimir Putin and his will to go to war. The Ukrainian army is currently putting the Russians under pressure with a counteroffensive. The coup by the Wagner mercenaries caused a stir around the world, and the Russian economy is suffering from the sanctions imposed by the West. It is understandable that the West is clinging to the tail of a weakened Kremlin, according to Alexander Gabuyev, director of the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, in a op-ed for the Financial Times. But according to Gabuyev, the Kremlin's assessment of the situation in Russia differs from that of the West. The Russian leadership still believes it can afford a long war. Growth is even forecast for the country's economy this year because of the round-the-clock working military factories. Despite the Western sanctions, the war chest is full thanks to the high energy gains in the past year. And should the pressure on the budget intensify, the Russian central bank could further devalue the ruble to pay soldiers, but also the defense industry and the internal security forces. Gabuyev writes in his contribution that Putin is probably also out for further escalation. The legislation that allows the Kremlin to send hundreds of thousands of men into combat reveals a sad truth. Vladimir Putin is far from achieving his disastrous wanting to leave the war in Ukraine behind, and is preparing for a bigger war, as Gabuyev said. The expert also does not believe that Putin could run out of weapons. He pumps large sums into the armaments industry, and important components for weapons such as microchips come from China, among other places. According to Gabuyev, the Russian ruler would do everything to weaken the West and win in Ukraine. Putin is betting that the potentially mobilizable Russian labor force is 3 to 4 times greater than that of Ukraine. With his law, he wants to mobilize, arm, train, and send many more men into battle. These measures should help Putin build a larger and better equipped army. The massive state investments in the expansion of arms production also contribute to this. As recently as last September, 300,000 Russian reservists were called up due to the obviously worse than expected course of the invasion of Ukraine. This increased the number of active professional soldiers and conscripts by more than 30% to 1.5 million. President Vladimir Putin justified this measure at the time by allegedly threatening Russia's territorial integrity. And under the new law, the parliament in Moscow has now decided that conscripts will not be used in combat outside of Russia. However, since last September, the government in Moscow has claimed 4 Ukrainian regions as Russian territory. This fueled concerns that conscripts could also be assigned to the front in Ukraine. Since April, the request for military service no longer has to be delivered in person, but can be done online. Many Russians have tried to avoid receiving the conscription order during the 2 conscription periods per year. The law passed by the Duma also gives governors in Russian regions the right to set up paramilitary units in times of mobilization or martial law. These militias are to be funded and armed by the state. And if you want to know more about the developments in the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, the next video is right in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.